Welcome to another week in review. We're looking at the trading week of April 14th. Just a quick note this week, it is Good Friday, April 18th, as we can see right here. So it is a stock market holiday. So just note that it is a short trading week, especially if you're trading options. Just remember that you have one less day of burn in there. So maybe go, following week or whatever. Just a suggestion. Pretty light week as far as data goes, which is kind of nice considering how preposterous last week turned out to be. Monday, we really don't have much. So Monday morning, we have Goldman Sachs earnings in the morning. I'm going to go through earnings after, but we have Goldman Sachs in the morning. We have Barkin and Waller speaking from 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. on Monday, which I don't really expect too much movement from that unless something wild is said. Friday, we have the manufacturing index at 8:30 a.m. Wednesday, we have retail sales. We have the 20-year bond auction at 1 p.m. And then we have Powell speaking. Let me scroll this down. We have Powell speaking at 1:30. So that's something to note for sure. Thursday, we have jobless claims, 8:30 as we normally do, as well as the manufacturing index. And then we have Barr speaking at 11:45. And then Friday, obviously, is Good Friday, so it is a market holiday, which is nice. From an earnings perspective, we do have some that matter that come out this week. So Monday morning, like I said, we have Goldman Sachs. We have Tuesday morning, we have Bank of America, Citi, Johnson & Johnson, PNC. I'd pay attention to those. Friday after close, we have United Airlines. Not going to be market moving, but it'll be interesting to see. Wednesday morning, I would pay attention to Bancorp, as well as Abbott. Those are two important ones. Not really much Wednesday after the close. Thursday morning, TSMC, obviously that's a big one. UNH, that's a big one. American Express, that's a big one as well. And Ally, it's important. And then after close, we get our first tech earnings starting to hit. That'll be Netflix. I have no idea how any of these companies are going to be doing. It's from like a fundamental perspective. I'm not really looking into that. I'm just looking at trading implications this week. So I would note all of these as well as anything else that you're interested in. I personally don't play earnings very often, so it's not really a big deal for me. It's just important to know that these are coming out for the sake of positioning on futures or indexes, etc. So to jump into this week, or I guess let's recap last week very quickly. Absolutely insane. One of the craziest weeks I've had in a very, very long time, probably since COVID, I would say. Have I not? We haven't really had volatility like that since COVID, and I think as far as where we ended up, it's not a bad position for buyers to end the week where we ended. So we started the week obviously with that huge liquidation. The previous video, I don't know if you watched it. I don't know if anybody watched it. I didn't get a lot of views, which is unfortunate, but this is exactly where I was looking. 4860s. This is 2024 value area low. We completed an entire value traverse on higher time frames. This is exactly where I was looking for a potential low to form, which is great. Worked out very well. Obviously, we had some really nice trades in and around this week. I didn't buy this exact low, so I'm not going to go say, I called it and I bought it. I didn't buy it. I watched to see what happened after the fact, and I started getting long on Friday, mostly because this to me, unless you were positioned long beforehand on the tariff pause announcement, this was, you basically had to chase it, which I actually did. I got some points on this, but you basically had to chase this after the announcement happened. And, once we basically broke away, it was very clear that, this market was going to keep moving into close. So I was able to get some points later in the day, but I was not positioned into this long or short actually. And obviously, it's an historic move that happened that day. So followed by another historic move that happened the day after. So obviously, we based around Tuesday, Wednesday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we had the tariff pause announcement. We had this massive rip up, absolutely ridiculous. And then Thursday, we almost hit a limit down on ES, retracing a good part of this move. I did catch, a decent chunk of this short on Thursday as well. Days like this, massive outlier up moves like this, the following days, very often are going to be digestion. So obviously we swept and failed the highs in Globex, and then we continued to sell. in the regular trading hours, and ultimately recovered right back around this prior balance area, prior balance high that we had right here. Friday also too was interesting. So Friday we were able to basically maintain the bid into 5260s. And full disclosure, Friday I was looking for this to break. I thought with the amount of the way that the overnight traded and with how rips above 5314s, this prior balance, with how this was getting sold back down, I thought we'd eventually break back in and mean revert down into potentially this low, or potentially into the weekly VWAP. And we didn't. We never broke 60s. So I had some decent shorts on the way down, but I wasn't able to break ultimately. And then eventually we did actually break higher through IB high and closed into the high of the week, turning the weekly into a triple distribution week. So a fairly strong close for buyers, especially considering the fact that, early in the week we were talking about, like, oh, we're in a recession, we're, everything's over, we're all screwed. And then by the end of the week, we ended up closing up. And just a few hours ago, we had an announcement from Trump that tariffs on phones and computers and chips are exempt. So that, in my opinion, the way this weekly has formed, and with that information that has just come to light, I would assume strength going into early this week, pending any other headline that comes out that negates what we just heard. So triple distribution weeklies, triple distribution profiles with triple distribution weeklies, basically what we want to see, strength is assumed if we're staying in the upper end of this distribution. So basically we had, we started with a big gap down. We ended up essentially, whipsawing around, but essentially with a bit of a trend week up, obviously with some ups and downs in that. But we have a solid foundation up here for buyers to try and work this higher. So the big thing I'm looking at right away on, come Globex, come Monday, is this 5380 up here and last week's PSC. So I'm going to assume that there's a gap up in Globex because of that news. But if we see any type of inventory correction down, the big thing I'm watching is if it's weekly POC in this upper distribution area up into 5380s, if this is holding, I'm going to be looking for viable lows to continue up into last week's highs and try and fill the gap up into 5600s. I don't really think this market is a fade, especially after that news and the way that last week's profile ended up breaking. I don't think this is a fade unless there's a very, very clear fail up at last week's lows and up into this gap, basically up into 5540s to 5600 area. If we have a gap fill reversal, especially hitting the upper end of the weekly expected move up here, then I think potentially you could see some mean reversion back down. But I think as far as trying to fade, breakaway move back up, trying to reach up into these highs, I think that's going to be very difficult. So the first big areas on the upside I'd be watching would be 5500s, this is the March low, as well as the full 50% retracement from the all-time highs to the sell lows. So basically that full 20% move, this is half. So holding above 5380s, I would be looking for the 5500 to 5540s, and then the 5600 move to try and backfill this gap. If there's a lot of insanity that happens this week from a buy side perspective, if we are able to get above this gap, then I think it's straight up into 5700 to 5720 again. That'd be my guess. The other area I'd be interested in fading this is if buyers, if we get any other headline that comes out that, negates what we just heard. This is a headline market very much so. If we get any other headline that comes in and negates what we just heard, or if we see buyers really drop the ball, or we see, extremely aggressive selling for whatever reason, and we end up losing 5300s. So we end up losing this area right here and start offering 5300s again, then I'll be looking to fade this and get back down to the bottom range of the expected move down back into the ATH lows from Friday, as well as last week's VWAP and the expected move low down into 5200 to 5180s. So I'm going to try and keep that very high level and very simple, just basically playing off of how this weekly formed. NASDAQ is going to be basically the same thing. I haven't really traded the NASDAQ much, and I don't know if I'll trade it this week, but it might have a better opportunity, especially with the tech concentration on the tariff exemptions. So we might have a better move, a leading move on the NASDAQ potentially. So it's going to be basically the same thing for me here. The first area I'll be looking at is this 1900 area, so March lows. So again, I think if we're breaking away from 19,000 area, I think if we're breaking above this, Then we're going to be looking at last week's highs tested fairly quickly. And then I think ultimately what you could probably look for is the value traverse back up into the March 31st weekly value area high up into 18,000 or 19,800s up into here. So 19,800s area. This would be my guess. So last week, the turnaround happened at 19,400, which was last week's POC. So we basically hit last week's POC to the tick. But again, we closed back above 18,700s. So again, like from a value traverse perspective, just to keep it really simple, what buyers want to do is stay inside this upper distribution ultimately, and then target the rotation back up to 19,800s, which I think happens potentially very quickly, especially if we get above this 19,000 area. So again, fades for me, not really interested in it unless we're really failing at prior week highs. So if we're unable to bid above this 19,380 area, then I think mean reversion down is possible. But again, I'm not super interested in trying to fade this, especially with that news that just came out. The other area that I'd be interested in trying to fade this would be a break below 18,350s. So break below the prior balance that we broke out of, that we held all day Friday. And it's also last week's POC. If we start offering 18,350s, then I think the rotation back down into 17,400s, 17,500 to 17,400s is quite likely. We do have a naked POC down here, obviously. This is also last week's value area low and the bottom end of last week's distribution. I think this only comes if we break through 18,350s. So general bias for me this week, again, pending anything else crazy that comes out, would be continuation higher. Ultimately, I don't know, especially on ES, ultimately, I don't know if we're setting up, we're going to have a drive away higher and setting up a lower high for continuation lower. I don't love the fact that we're leaving these lows in ETH. Usually I want to see a really solid low get put in the regular trading hour session. It's not the first time that we obviously have had, a liquidation low get bought and not retested in extended trading. But like ideally for me, I would like to see these cleaned up at some point in time. Whether we get that, this year, whether we get that, from potentially a lower high forming higher up in this range, I don't actually know. So in the short term, I think bias for me simply is to look at, how we close the week in a fairly strong manner. If we're staying inside the upper distribution or upper two distributions basically of last week's range, then for me it's really looking for that continuation move back up, ideally to fill this upper gap and then up into 5,700s, and then it would be a fade really to me, really only really a fade if we're losing 5,300s, and then we can see if we can start testing the lower end of last week's range. That's how I'm going to look at it. So I'm going to try and keep it really simple. I'm hoping that, we don't get blasted with more headlines that come out this week. It's Saturday at about 1 p.m. when I'm recording this. So if there's any differences from the information that's out later this week or later this weekend until, Monday open, then obviously, I think that the bias for me could shift. But as far as areas to look, I think they're all going to be the same on both indexes here. So that's how I'm going to look at this week. I'm going to try and keep it pretty simple. I hope this video helps. If it does, please subscribe, leave a comment if it helps, or if there's anything you want me to cover in the future. Appreciate your time.